Welcome to Matrescence Unfiltered, the podcast exploring what really happens to your identity, ambition, and career when you become a mother. Matrescence is the transition into motherhood, and it's one of the biggest identity shifts a woman will ever go through. Yet, when it comes to our careers, it's still barely understood. So often, motherhood gets framed as something to push through and bounce back from.
We think it's something else entirely, a capability shift, and we think it's time to name it and to talk about it properly. I'm Rose, coach, consultant, and researcher completing a master's in organisational psychology.
And I'm Bianca, a chief marketing officer, pregnant, and living this experience in real time. Each episode, we take one belief about motherhood and work that doesn't hold up under scrutiny and break it down properly.
Using research, lived experience, and honest conversations about what sustainable high performance actually looks like when your identity is shifting.
Welcome to Matrescence Unfiltered. We're really glad you're here.
Bianca, how have you been feeling this week?
A big week for me because I am preparing my maternity leave planning and all of the emotions that come with it. So in today's episode, I think it would be great to get into maternity leave, although put a pin in leave because I may have a problem with that word, but that's a spoiler. So
This is a big one. Planning for your maternity leave. How's it going? What is your thought process? How are you navigating it? I'd love to hear.
I have worked full-time since I was 18 years old. Work is completely central to my identity, and routine is how I connect with the world and, in many ways, manage my mental health. So, if I'm being really honest, I'm feeling quite shaky. It does feel unnatural to be stepping into this undefined amount of time away from work. I've never had more than 2 weeks off, and if I'm being even more honest, I've never not checked my emails for longer than, say, 48 hours. Not endorsing that, just sharing my reality with it. So I think that my responses to conversations about maternity leave, how long I'm going to take, what my plan is, the terrible question, when are you coming back? My responses have been more heightened than I expected. And I think something that I've found quite interesting is that nobody in this scenario really wants to say the wrong thing. So
No.
we've talked about the announcement and how that can go and the importance of that setting the tone. But that's just the first conversation of many that come up. And now that I'm really in the thick of it around, okay, I've hired not my replacement, because we've ended up hiring a permanent deputy for the team. We've made another hire as a designer in the team because we're a marketing function. I'm thinking, I'm not going to be around for these people to be onboarded the way that I would do it. I'm not going to be managing this rebrand that I'm about to launch when it comes to the activation. So there's a process of surrender that is feeling entirely unnatural. So top level, that's where I'm at. And I know we're going to get more into it. I'm nervous. I'm excited. I have no idea who I'm going to be on the other side.
I think what's really important there is to acknowledge that you will be different on the other side. I have lots of conversations through my coaching and even my research around what the high performance means before you go on maternity leave versus what high performance means when you come back. And often, particularly women I speak to before they go on maternity leave with their first child, usually, they have this perception that they'll come back unchanged. They'll just bounce back, which is a term I absolutely hate. It's so toxic. And they'll just go back to being who they were before. And I think what's really important to acknowledge here is the huge identity shift that's coming, and your brain will literally rewire itself, and you'll come back a different version of yourself. You won't be worse, but your priorities will inevitably shift. And I think it's really good for you to kind of frame it in that way. Like, I'm excited to see who I am on the other side, because I know from experience from working with women like this is when they come back on the other side, they tend to really struggle. And I think that at a societal level, we expect women to have it all, to do it all. And that's just not not right. So I think, I think it's a really fresh perspective for you to say, I'm going to see who I am on the other side because I acknowledge that I might not be the same. You know, what is in your circle of control right now is you're hiring, you're planning the team and you can support them in the best possible way. But actually the onboarding, whoever's going to be running the team when you're gone, like that's not something you need to worry about. You're going to be busy with a baby and you can look and see what lens you look at that through on the other side.
I feel like I'm almost being catapulted into space, and I have no idea where I'm going to land. That's how, at this point in my pregnancy in the third trimester, I feel when it comes to, okay, this is in completely unknown, uncharted territory for me. But something that I've been holding on to a lot is a quote, and I'm going to paraphrase it. It's from one of the Squiggly Careers podcast hosts.
Yeah.
And she talked about how becoming a mother doesn't end your ambition, it simply asks you to redefine it. So, that process of redefinition, I'm open to, but having to surrender and let go and relinquish control, work in progress. And I think that that's so linked to the hypervigilance that we know exists as part of matrescence. So, I would love to know more about that. And I'm curious, Rose, when we're thinking about the hypervigilance that we know is enhanced and intensified through matrescence, how much of it do you think is that natural hypervigilance? And how much of it is actually a genuine thing to be concerned about when we look at the broader data set?
One of the biggest things is, and we've spoken about this before, is during matrescence, you have that heightened threat response, that increased risk awareness. Your brain is constantly scanning for danger. Now, what that translates to at work is, what if they replace me? What if my cover is better than me, as you were just saying? What if they don't want me back? I think is one of the biggest questions that people ask themselves. This is not anxiety. This is neurology. So we spoke about, I think it was in the first episode, around how our brain literally changes. It becomes smaller. It fine tunes, it prunes. It's not becoming less intelligent, but the brain is becoming more specialized, more efficient at reading social cues and detecting threats. So your threat detection system is turned way up. That is the design. The problem is that nobody tells you that. So when you sit in a meeting thinking something is wrong with you, nothing is wrong with you. Your brain, as we've spoken about before, is upgrading. And the workplace stress during pregnancy isn't just uncomfortable, it actually has lasting effects. A Norwegian study of nearly 78,000 employed women found that work stress measured at 17 weeks gestation was significantly associated with depression and anxiety, both later in pregnancy and at 6 months postpartum. The stress you experience at work while you're pregnant doesn't just stay in that period, it follows you.
That is both reassuring and worrying. I had no idea that there was so much research that could back the things that I've been feeling. Because I think as women, we're so conditioned at times to think, oh, it's all in my head, or I'm feeling too much. I'm overly sensitive to these things. So I really thank you for sharing that. And I think that you have to look at the practicalities of it. So you have to
Totally.
say to yourself, right, there is a genuine change happening that I have to navigate, I've got to plan for. But at the same time, let me be gentle with myself because my brain is doing this naturally anyway. And that's what so much of this goes back to again and again. You are not imagining the things that you're feeling. You're not imagining the threats. And that is on the neurological side. If we look at the broader data of what actually happens when women go on maternity leave, some of the outcomes that we're hearing about more and more, and there's stats around, for example, by age 35, 50% of women have dropped out of working in tech. Why? Because we're working in environments that are not built for us. Systemically, they're not made for us. So there's a lot at play here. But I think the key point that I'm taking, as somebody preparing to go on maternity leave is to not internalize my emotions around this transition as my personal failing.
Yeah, and I think it's really important here as well to recognize that, yes, we have these neurological changes happening, but that neuroprotective piece that we've spoken about before is really based on the environment. So if you are in a high stress environment, which we've just spoken about, the studies showing that the impact on depression and anxiety later in pregnancy and postpartum, that is going to have such a big influence on how you show up, how you feel. So I think we can't just write off all of the perceived threats as this increased threat response, because it's not just that. Like, if you are in an
Yeah.
environment where you are treated negatively, 1 in 5 pregnant women experience harassment or negative comments about their pregnancy at work. So there is an environmental piece here as well around the environmental stress factors that are going to have an impact on you. So I think is a balance of understanding, yes, that threat response is natural and it is your brain rewiring, reshaping, pruning, fine-tuning. But also, if you're in an environment where you are feeling harassed or having negative experience, then you're very valid in feeling that threat as well. So I think it's important just to recognize that too.
I so agree with you. And I'm wondering if we can get in some of the practical tips for anybody preparing to go on maternity leave. I can kick off by sharing a few things that have really been helping me. So, firstly, if you're working for a smaller organization, as I am, where I've had some examples during the 2 years that I've worked there of people going on maternity leave, but not that many. And I can't
Mm,
see a very clear process structure, onboarding, offboarding, re onboarding, all of it, the rest of it. We don't have that down as a business because we're not a huge organization, right? So if you, like me, are working in an environment where you perhaps don't know what's coming on the other side of this, I think there are some proactive steps you can take. Firstly, really getting some clarity around what your keeping in touch days will look like, what onboarding on the other side will entail, what you need to feel secure and also in touch with the business. It's very valid that you don't know how you're going to feel. And all the mothers that I speak to say to me, well, just wait and see. You're going to feel really different compared to what you imagine. And as I said, I feel like I'm going to be catapulted into space. I don't know. But control the controllables. Get the
mm,
information that you need, practically speaking, so you can have some semblance of control around these are the touch points that I want to put in place for myself. Get as much of that roadmap in place before you go. There's nothing more daunting for any of us humans, pregnant, not pregnant, male, female, or otherwise, than the unknown. So, this is all stuff that you really don't want to be figuring out while you're also thinking and starting nursery. That's another great piece of advice that I've heard. You When it comes to actually putting your baby in nursery and going through that transition, there's going to be a kind of interim period where they're adjusting, you're adjusting. So, this idea that you can just set the nursery up and away we go, back as if nothing has changed, is a lie. And that's a standard that I will not be holding myself to. But it does suck, and it is a shame that we have to prepare this intensely. Nursery wait lists are so long here in the UK. The moment you get a positive test, you're already planning, planning, planning. There's the financial modelling, months in advance. It's a rational response to a system that offers almost no structural support. So it's not that we're over preparing, it's that we're having to overcompensate for a gap that shouldn't exist. And I feel for us, but control what you can control because I'm finding it helps that little bit.
yeah, I couldn't agree with you more there. And what I always say to my coaching clients is prepare yourself as best you can. Like, in this world in 2026, your work, your role will not be the same when you come back in 6, 12, 9 months' time. Your role is going to change. So asking ahead of time, like over the next 12 months, can you just, or however long you're going to be off for, as part of my return to work piece, can you create like a one pager or a deck just highlighting all of the key changes that has happened in the last 6, 12, 9 months, however long you've been off. I think what we have the opportunity for here is a little bit of self advocacy. You can say and start these conversations yourself as the person going on maternity leave. I know you don't want the burden necessarily to sit with you, but ultimately it will prepare you so much better coming back into the organization. So, setting those boundaries around conversations. How do you want to be communicated with? Phone, email, a regular news, roundup into your personal email, whatever that might look like. And that might change once the baby's here. But I think depending on HR to be the gatekeeper, the bottleneck, like especially if you're in a big organization, like having that just, WhatsApp conversation or whatever it might be with colleagues or your boss, your leader, is probably going to be quite life changing on the other side because you won't feel as disconnected. And I know not everybody necessarily has that good connection with their managers and their leaders. But I think just trying to prepare yourself as best as possible, asking kind of for a bit of a checklist. So sometimes I sit with my clients and we do a little bit of a checklist. What would make you feel good going back in? What answers do you want to have now? So as you said, when you're settling into nursery, you're not also having to worry about reintegrating and re-onboarding back into your role. So a little checklist, which might look like putting together a one-pager of the key changes in the last 12 months, new members of the team, who should I be speaking to, any changes in direct reports, who's left, who's got promoted, really, really simple things on paper that are very simple to put into place, free most of the time for an organization. And yeah, I think you can make those requests before you go back in. Even I think it's simple, and I had this conversation the other day, is just understanding how to make a flexible working request upon return. Because again, that's not necessarily something you want to be navigating. And a lot of the time, some of the women I'm speaking to, their initial flexible working request is denied. So then they're having to go to appeal. And it's not as straightforward as it might seem. And with all of the additional, nursery, baby settling in, all of the other life stuff going on, as best you compare yourself before you go off is my biggest piece of advice. So I don't think it's a case of over preparing, but I think it's a case of just knowing you and yourself personally. You might be like easy breezy, like I don't care what happens. I will rock back up and I will deal with it then. Like maybe I think I'm a little bit like that. Like I will just go with the flow. But other people
I
need
will
that
not.
structure.
I can confirm that unless the change is that seismic, I can't see that happening to me. But that is such good practical advice. Thank you for sharing it. You've already got me thinking about how I've written out my birth plan, but on a personal level, looking at my professional plan, there's more that I can do there to really think through what my boundaries are with it, with the caveat that it's all subject to change. Don't know what kind of birth I'm going to end up having, don't know how my baby is going to be. So I think you have to have a degree of flexibility in even the most watertight plan that you come up with. But thank you for all of that practical advice because I think it's helpful for me to hear. And it helps me remind myself, I guess, that I have more of a say than perhaps you'd be led to believe. So I really, really love that. Something I have to confess is how much I'm cringing at the fact that I've said to team members before when they've come to me and they've announced their pregnancies, don't worry, nothing will change. We value you so much. We can't wait to have you back. Nothing will change, nothing will change, nothing will change. And before I became pregnant, before I understood matrescence and everything we're discussing, that was me trying to be reassuring. And now I'm finding it incredibly cringy. So, can we talk about this nothing will change myth and the performative nature of being fine and unchanged when, of course, everything is going to change? That's kind of the whole point.
So I think there's a couple of things to this, and it's really interesting. I love your candor, your confession. I think that's really, you're not alone with that. And most women before they go on maternity leave have this mindset of nothing is going to change. That only happens to other women. And I think the discrimination that pregnant women and mothers receive in the workplace is a reason for that. Like women don't want it to happen to them. But there is actually some research to back this up. So LSE research on 80 working mums across 5 countries found that the dominant social narrative treats motherhood, as we've spoken about before, this linear process. You fall pregnant, you take leave, experience some uncertainty, but then you come back, you fully integrate, and, job done. The assumption is that the process is finished, but actually, what came out from the interviews of this research is that it's a continuous, never ending process. So, we've spoken about matrescence compared to adolescence before. There's no set period for adolescence, it starts and finishes for everybody differently. Everybody experiences it differently, and that is the same with matrescence. So, the story that we're sold is not the reality. And what's really interesting about the before experience is this research found that the pregnant workers, that most women said their self-perception hadn't substantially changed during pregnancy. So they hadn't thought about, oh, I will come back differently. So that's why I said earlier, that's a really unique perspective of you to have, that you don't know who you'll be on the other side. Their concerns weren't internal. They were focused more on how other people viewed them differently. So the identity threat rather than the identity shift.
So it's more external than internal. So interesting.
Yeah, so the perception before they go off is more that external threat. And then when they come back, it's actually the identity shift.
And I don't think there's anything you can properly do to prepare for that. But I want to touch on something there. You mentioned the duration of adolescence and matrescence also being this undefined period of time. And we have to underline that. It's an undefined period of time. Don't apply a timeline to yourself. Don't carry those expectations. And then my mind actually links it to menopause, funnily enough, which is another transitional phase for women, again, with an undefined timeline. And I think that, it's the very beginning of this, but I do think that there is an increasing, rising public consciousness and discourse around menopause. So can we please start applying that to matrescence as well?
Well, what's really interesting with that is we are seeing women having babies later on in life. So rather than being mid to late 20s, they are early 40s when they're having their first child. And then if you want multiple children, that could take you early 40s to mid to late 40s. So alongside that, women will start their perimenopausal symptoms. So actually, fun fact for you, you may already know this, but menopause is actually only one day. So it's the day that is a whole year since you've had your last period. So before that, you are perimenopausal, and after that, you are postmenopausal. But yeah, menopause is actually only one day. So you've now got this transition of mothers who are also then going through this other huge life developmental shift of perimenopause. And yeah, it's just constant change. And it's wild. We don't get a break as women.
We do. And if that isn't a lesson in complete letting go of the outcome, trusting the process, putting your faith into the universe if you're that way inclined, I don't know what is. It is completely exhausting to think about, honestly. But it helps to know that we're not alone, at least with the data and everything that you're sharing. What has also really got me thinking is about all of the amazing female leaders that I've seen and worked with who have made very drastic choices to not let this period of leave impact how they're perceived and their reputation at work. What does data show us about that?
So that same LSE research that I was just talking about, it actually identifies 2 specific coping strategies. So the first one is image maintenance. So this is maintaining that pre-pregnancy pace, not requesting accommodations, shortening maternity leave, going the extra mile. The other is decategorization. So trying to distance themselves from being seen as the pregnant one or the working mother entirely. And there's that phrase, I will butcher this because I can never get phrases right, but it's like you're expected to parent like you don't have a job and work like you don't have
Yes.
a family and children. So I think that's really interesting. And women in unsupportive workplaces are more likely to engage in both. And just some advice for anyone thinking about doing this, particularly that, image maintenance piece. The women that I speak to who have made the decision to, and obviously it is always a personal choice, but most of those women tell me that if they have decided to shorten their maternity leave, that they actually regret doing that, that they wish they'd taken the time, especially if it was paid time off. They're taking 3 months rather than the 6 or the 9 that they're paid for. So I think that's also really important to just share there, that often on the other side, it's very different. When they're 5, 10, going to school, the reflective piece can come up.
As somebody who is planning on taking the period of time where I have my enhanced maternity pay in its entirety, I've made that decision and I still don't feel fully at peace. So when somebody at work asks me, "Oh, when are you coming back?" or "What are your plans?" I find myself saying, my plan is to take this amount of time, or I will try to take this amount of time, but I'm so committed. I love my job. There's so much to do. So let's see, I'm still making those concessions. So I get it. I get it completely. Even with the greatest will and the best intentions in the world, our conditioning runs really deep.
So in the UK, you're not actually supposed to ask people when they're coming back from maternity leave. So share as much as you feel comfortable sharing. You can give people a bracket and say, maybe I'll be back in 3 to 6 months. You don't have to give everyone a set date. If you want to give someone a set date, it wouldn't be my recommendation, especially not on this side of maternity leave. But you don't have to commit to a date. You don't have to do anything right now. But yeah, under UK employment law, you don't have to give anyone a set time and date.
I didn't know that, and that's very helpful information. Thank you. So, shifting gears a little bit here in terms of audience and what we're covering, what should leaders actually be doing during this pre leave period that I'm currently in? So, not just in the first conversation, but the weeks and months where a woman is still working, we're still delivering, but we're also preparing for this huge transition. What advice would you give leaders?
So, someone I interviewed this week put it perfectly. And she said, it's such a seismic shift in your life that it needs a seismic response. It is a life altering experience when you become a mother. It's not unique, no. So many women go through it each year, but it's still huge. And we are still navigating it in organizations in a way that is just unsupportive and it's not good enough. So, if I was speaking to a leader right now who is navigating someone going off on maternity leave and even coming back on the other side, which I know we're going to do a separate episode on, but again, just be human, have those conversations and, you know, don't just depend on HR to be that kind of bottleneck. Like HR are doing a lot when it comes to policy and process and, the administrative pieces, like let them take care of that. You, as that person's leader, you have such an important role. There was a survey of 471 women that found that the line manager was the single biggest factor determining whether a pregnant woman's experience at work was positive or negative. So, your role as a leader is absolutely critical. It will set the tone and the support on the other side of maternity leave. Start having those really human conversations and just say, like, look, I know HR are going to deal with the admin and the onboarding and the kit days and that sort of stuff, but I'd love to know, human to human, person to person, how do you want to be contacted? Do you want us to check in on you on WhatsApp once a month as a team? Do you want us to let you know if anything big happens as a team, if Jeremy gets engaged or, whatever, like just these human things? Or do you want to be left entirely alone? Because that's also a right. If you
Valid.
don't want any contact with work, you can say, and that's totally fair. So I think just starting to understand the boundaries and what she's comfortable with going into it, and also knowing that these might change when she's in it, because
Yes.
that is something that is not acknowledged as well, because I have spoken to women on the other side who have said, I thought I wanted to do this and actually I want to push my maternity leave out a few months. Or I said that I was coming back on this date and now they're trying to hold me to that. And it feels a bit too soon. So just
Yeah.
be human, have those conversations, understand that things might change. And yeah, just know that your role is really important here and be kind and empathetic and supportive where you can.
Wouldn't it be incredible if in those conversations and in the kit days, the keeping in touch days, we also asked questions like, how are you cognitively feeling? What skills are actually being sharpened? You've got a completely different vantage point now. Imagine if there was an actual framework that equipped leaders to bring in the skills sharpened through matrescence. That would be the dream. And it feels like a really wasted opportunity for workplaces to not have that integration piece. But hopefully, the more that we talk about these things, the body of work that we're creating and others are creating can bring some of that into the light.
Honestly, I think the more people that bring this into kind of the mainstream conversation, the better. And the more organizations, the more leaders understand the strengths and developments that come with matrescence, the easier these conversations will be to have. I hope that by having these conversations that people will start to shift the way they look at women going off on maternity leave, starting a family, getting pregnant. And the final point I will say to leaders that actually work and going on maternity leave and growing a baby are not the only two things she has going on in her life. She will have a full life full of lots of different things, lots of different nuances and complexities. So, whilst work is really important and having this baby is really important, it's so multifaceted. There's so much going on that, just give her a bit of a break.
That resonates so deeply because can I tell you something I've been struggling with in this period of time leading up to maternity leave? My partner has just got a new job. And as I prepare to go on this leave, his career is accelerating. His new employers are fine about paternity leave, which is of course so much shorter than mine. And life goes on, his career goes on. He's growing, he's leading, he's doing amazing things. I'm so proud of him, but I have had this real moment of grief because we are two parents having fundamentally different experiences. And if I'm being really truthful, I don't know how I'm going to feel on the days where he's out there doing things, his career's thriving, and I'm at home for the whatever day in a row, listening to the wheels on the bus for the fifth time, and so in a kind of more introspective world with my baby. And I think what I'm learning, although I will report back on this, is that you can be genuinely happy for your partner and for our family that we're growing. The new job is amazing in many ways and still feel the grief of that disparity. Both things can be true. And I don't think as women we're given enough permission to say that out loud. But because the moment you name it, you almost sound ungrateful. But you're not ungrateful. You're allowed to feel the sense of loss. I am not in a life phase where my career can accelerate in those ways. There are definitely skills that I'm developing and things that I'm going to do. But right now, as we are a month and a bit out from our due date, everything's opening up for him. So there is a little bit of what I'm calling and thinking of as anticipatory grief. Yeah, and I think I'm just sitting with that at the moment. It's a big feeling for me. And I don't think this conversation is complete without mentioning the disconnect that I anticipate in our relationship as two parents having that level of a different experience.
Yeah, so what you've just described there is really interesting because you're both stepping away from your company for a reason. Your partner has got this new job. You know what to expect with a new job. You know it's exciting, it's challenging. You get to meet new people. It's kind of, especially those first 3 months, they are intense, but they are always interesting and challenging, and you learn. So, from through research, through friends, through, seeing people have babies, that your first 3 months in this new role as a mother are, yes, they're going to be challenging, but they're also going to be really hard. Like it's a completely different challenge. And you don't know what to expect with this challenge, but you would know what to expect going into a new role. So I think that's really interesting. It's the disparity, isn't it?
It is. And there's also inevitably a financial disparity too. We are going to do a whole episode on money. and what that looks like. But this is the first time in my career where I've been looking at a situation in a partnership thinking, hold on a second. I'm not going to be in as strong a financial position as I typically would be because I don't know, as we've been talking about, how long I'm going to take.
So this is actually one of the most researched dynamics of the motherhood penalty literature. So men's careers don't just continue, they actively accelerate. And I've actually heard this recently being called the daddy bonus. Men's wages rise by 8 to 14% when they become fathers. We spoke about this in the first episode, but employers perceive them as more stable, more committed, more deserving. They're more likely to get promoted. Same life as an event, opposite career outcome. However, as you mentioned, you get enhanced maternity leave. Statutory paternity leave in the UK is 2 weeks. Like, how, when we have systemically not got equality in leave, can we expect equality in caregiving? So I think it is so complicated. And yes, we will do a full episode on money. The system is structurally set up for one parent purely because of the way maternity leave is set up. And that's not personal, that is systemic.
Here, here. I think that the disconnect in careers, acceleration, identity within a partnership is something that I know is coming for me. I could feel it. And I'm looking forward to sharing exactly what it actually manifests as and what I learn about navigating it. Because, again, uncharted territory, as all of this is for me, but that part in particular, I'm worried about. Now, I wanted to bring something into the conversation that actually has really brought me a sense of comfort as we wrap up the episode about going on maternity leave. And it's a Substack piece that I found from a writer called Harriet Wright, who has started a Substack called Mothers at Work. So I'm just going to read a passage of it to you because I have been struggling with seeing myself on maternity leave as someone who has always been a full-time work and not really ever taken any proper leave. So I wanted to just share this because it painted a picture for me. So she begins. I'm sitting in a neighborhood cafe in London, and all around me are women with babies. I look at them, feeding, monitoring, and soothing. And I find myself imagining who else these women are besides mothers: leaders, lawyers, dentists, teachers, founders. And yet here they are in this strange, intoxicating chapter of maternity leave. Focused, dedicated, conscientious, their energy shining down on their babies, the same energy that for years was directed toward their work, their careers, and their ambitions. Motherhood demands that focus, but the experience is also deeply disorientating. For 20 to 40 odd years, you learn how to be one person in the world. You build routines, identities, habits. You become competent, confident, capable. And then almost overnight, everything changes and you become someone else. The structure of your days, your priorities, and your identity is completely upended. And just as you begin to find your footing, just as your confidence grows, and the bond with your baby deepens, the next transition appears. You go back to work, only you're not the same person who left. Everything has changed. And so I love this piece because just imagining myself in that cafe with all those layers of identity, I just had to share that.
I literally have tears in my eyes. That is so beautifully written. And I think it speaks to so many women. I hear this from women that I coach and that I've spoken to through my research. Like, who am I anymore? And I think that is, yeah, it's just really beautifully written. Thank you for sharing that.
No, I knew that you would love it. And I think that so much of this transition happens in complete private and it's not brought out in these conversations. So the research that you're doing and the conversation we're having here can really just help us piece that together. So I think it's a beautiful visual that I'm going to be holding on to on those days where it is a little bit lonelier. That's what I'm
Yeah.
expecting.
And one thought there I have of listening to you read that out is this concept of, it's called the MLM, which is not a multi-level marketing scheme. It's the mental load of motherhood. And you don't have that in your version of yourself before, even though you're going through matrescence, like you don't have that on the other side when you're coming back into work. You have this increased mental load, and it's huge. And then you're going through all these shifts, and that mental load, that additional cognitive load, is not appreciated.
We're carrying a lot. We are experiencing a lot. And we're doing all of this against a backdrop of a load of stats about what motherhood does to our careers. So it's natural to feel the statistics and the headlines and the warnings with everything else we're going through is heavy. So this is a perfect segue, I feel, onto our final closing ritual of retiring a term. So, what do you think we should retire for this episode?
So I think we should retire maternity leave, because you are not having time off. You are going to be working full time, but just in a different way. You're going to be caregiving full time.
And this is an entirely new job, but one with transferable skills. One that's going to give you leadership skills that you will take back to your other role. So you're not leaving, you're developing, you're changing, and you're transitioning into something far greater than what was there before. So that to me doesn't sound like leave. That sounds like some deep professional and personal development. Let's retire it. Goodbye, leave.
Thank you all for joining us today.
If you've taken something from this episode, we'd be so grateful if you shared it with a friend.
We'd also love to hear from you. Find us on Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn. And please share your questions, comments, and experiences. This is a conversation we want to build together.
Until next time.